The immediate question is that the amendment be agreed to. I call the member for Aston.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise also to speak on the appropriations bills before us. And these appropriations bills, of course, form this year's federal budget. And they were not just a missed opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, but they were irresponsible given the economic situation that we find ourselves in. Our high-level numbers still look reasonably healthy, unemployment and the growth prospects, but these cloud underlying weaknesses, and there are significant storm clouds on the horizon. When you take out Western Australia, for example, South Australia, Tasmania and Victoria are all close to zero or negative growth. Retail has flatlined, manufacturing has flatlined and are laying off workers week in, week out, and housing approvals are at their lowest levels for many years. Meanwhile, when you look at the situation overseas, it looks quite dire. Greece is facing a political and economic crisis which will have implications for the finance sector across the globe. Many China analysts are predicting that their growth is slowing, and America, while seems to be recovering, is still not fully out of the woods yet. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the context of this year's budget, where we have economic insecurity at home and where we have storm clouds on the horizon abroad. And it is because of this context that the budget is particularly irresponsible, because it further undermines economic confidence and does nothing for cost of living pressures, and it increases employment insecurity. And at this time, under these difficult economic conditions, we should be doing everything that we can to make the economy stronger in order to create wealth. This means running budget surpluses, it means curtailing government expenditure, and where possible, reducing government taxes so that there is a healthier business environment for them to thrive. But in fact, this budget does the opposite. And let's go through and look at some of these top-line figures. To start with, of course, the budget continues the government's spending spree. Now, they would have you believe that this budget was all about fiscal consolidation. That was the mantra from the governments this year. But when you actually look at the figures, it tells a different story. Because the budget papers actually increase expenditure by $2.2 billion over the next 14 months. An extra $2 billion in the next 2 months alone. And then an additional expenditure of $0.2 billion over the following 12 months. From a cash basis, there is an additional $8.7 billion of expenditure in next financial year. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government talks about fiscal constraints, but clearly it is not delivering in this regard, because the bottom line is it simply cannot control its expenditure. When you look at the overall aggregate expenditure, the government is now spending an unbelievable $100 billion a year more than what they inherited in 2007. $100 billion a year more. That's a 40% increase in government expenditure from 5 years ago, when inflation during that time was only 13%. And what's that extra $100 billion a year delivered? Do we look around the country and see that all of the freeways have been fixed, that there's new rail lines in place, that the port bottlenecks have been addressed? Do we see the Rowville Rail finally built after all of these years, or the Eastern Freeway connection to the Tulla done? No, Madam Deputy Speaker. We don't see any of those things. We don't even see those even under construction at this stage. Rather, the expenditure has been out of control, and the quality of the expenditure has been as poor as the overall volume of the expenditure. We have had 20,000 additional public servants with that extra money. We've had, of course, pink bats put in hundreds of thousands of people's roofs and then ripped out of hundreds of thousands of people's roofs. We've had school halls built at twice the price as what they could have been. We've had billions extra spent on border control, and we've had waste after waste after waste of expenditure. That's the legacy of this additional $100 billion per annum, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is the travesty, that we have so little to show for all of this additional money which the government is expending, all of this additional taxpayers' funds, we have so little to show for it. Now let's look at the revenue side. Madam Deputy Speaker, we've talked about the expenditure side. When you look at the revenue side, there is another 6 new taxes in this budget. 6, bringing to a grand total of 26 either new or increased taxes since the government came to office 4.5 years ago. Next year, residents will be slugged an additional $39 billion in tax compared to this year. That's the fiscal consolidation, an extra tax slug of $39 billion for next financial year. And of course, the company tax, which dare not speak its name, which was promised for so long, failed to materialise on budget night. The government made a big song and dance about this, that it was going to be delivering tax cuts to all of these companies, all of these small businesses. The member for Deakin, who sits in the adjacent seat to me, even wrote out 2 days before the budget, he wrote to every business in his electorate claiming that there was going to be a company tax cut in the budget. 2 days before the budget, Madam Deputy Speaker, and of course it did not materialise. It was another broken promise by this government. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've looked at the expenditure, we've looked at the revenue, now let's get to debt, because this is the granddaddy of them all. We have already had, as you'd be aware, the 4 biggest government deficits in Australian political history over the last 4 years. The 4 biggest government deficits in Australian political history. And this government continues this pattern. The debt ceiling will increase incredibly to $300 billion. So it's had to go up to $200 billion and then to $250 billion. And in the fine print of these budget papers, it shows that they need to increase the debt ceiling by an extra $50 billion to $300 billion. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this goes to the farce of the government being in control of their expenditure and running surpluses. Clearly, if they were running surpluses, they wouldn't be needing to increase the debt ceiling to $300 billion. Net debt, of course, will climb to $145 billion, an increase of almost $40 billion since last year's budget. And by 2015-2016, the government will spend $8 billion a year just on interest repayments. $8 billion just on interest on the debt alone. That money just disappears. That doesn't go towards anything. That $8 billion a year, that could build 8 tertiary hospitals around Australia. That could build the Rowville rail link 4 times over, year in, year out. That would build the connection from the Eastern Freeway to the Tullamarine Freeway in Melbourne, Madam Deputy Speaker. But $8 billion will just be gone next year and the year after and the year after that, just on paying the interest on the debt. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is the price of Labor's legacy of waste and reckless spending. It took the coalition almost a decade to pay off the $96 billion of debt which we inherited back in 1996. It is now $145 billion and still growing, and Labor is still in power. And how many years is that going to take us to pay off once we do get back into power? I don't know, Madam Deputy Speaker. Certainly at the rate of the surplus of next year, which the government claims it will deliver, it will take 100 years. That's how long it'll take, 100 years at the rate of the surplus which the Treasurer claims that he will deliver next year. Let me make a couple of other points, Madam Deputy Speaker, on some of these specifics in the budget. First of all, the carbon tax. At the end of the day, this budget was a carbon tax budget. May not have been mentioned by the Treasurer in his speech. It may not be mentioned in the $37 million of ads which are running non-stop at the moment, but it was very much a carbon tax budget that the 2012-13 budget was. Now, I've spoken on this before, Madam Deputy Speaker, but this carbon tax, as you know, will increase electricity prices by 10% in the first year alone. It will increase gas by 9% in the first year alone. According to the Victorian Treasury, it will cost 24,000 jobs in Victoria alone, including 500 in my electorate. It will increase government rates by an estimated 3% across the board, according to the Municipal Association of Victoria. That's an extra $1.5 million in the municipality of Knox. And over the next 40 years, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this is perhaps the most astounding figure, and this is these are the government's figures, over the next 40 years, the carbon tax will cost the economy $1.3 trillion, which is the equivalent of an entire year's GDP of this nation gone on the carbon tax, i.e. we're going to be working for an entire year. Every single man and woman in this country will be working for a year just to pay the carbon tax. That's what they're going to be doing. It's an incredible figure, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's the government's own figure. It's not ours, it's the government's own figure. And of course, these figures that I was talking about of the price increases are just a start, because the tax will increase. It's legislated to increase from $23 to $29 over the next 3 years, and that is forecast to continue to go up and up and up, all the way up to $135 by 2050. A couple other items I'd like to touch on, Madam Deputy Speaker. The NDIS. We on this side of the chamber are very supportive of the NDIS, and we've called upon the government to make this a bipartisan commitment and have a bipartisan team which looks at that and oversees the implementation. So we were pleased to see that at least there was some money put towards it in the budget, $1 billion. What, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am disappointed about is that the Productivity Commission recommended $3.9 billion. And so there is a $2.9 billion shortfall, Madam Deputy Speaker. And so I believe that that the government is raising the expectations to the disability sector, and it will not be able to deliver on those expectations. Let me touch on the school kids bonus, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government, day in, day out, has been saying that we don't support providing additional assistance for families to pay for their school education costs. That is wrong. We do support that. We supported the existing education tax offset program, and in fact we took to the last election a policy to increase the education tax offset program to $1,000 for a secondary school child and $500 for a primary school child. But importantly, Madam Deputy Speaker, we insisted that there be a strong nexus between the program and what the money would be spent on. And that means that an individual simply had to collect their receipts and they got the money back through the tax system. It's called accountability, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know it's a word which the Labor government has difficulties with, but on this side of the House, we think it is important. It's important for the taxpayer to ensure that their money is going towards the stated purpose. And it's important on the recipient of the benefit to ensure that they use the money for its stated purpose as well. Accountability, Madam Deputy Speaker. That is an important principle on this side of the House, and we just wish the government would actually pull out the dictionary and work out for themselves what that word means and apply that term to more of its government programs. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me touch on school funding. There was big expectations about this budget delivering on the Gonski review. We had heard that the government was going to be legislating for the next quadrennium of funding to fund non-government schools and government schools. But when you look at the figures, Madam Deputy Speaker, it does not deliver on the additional $5 billion which the Gonski review recommended. In fact, it doesn't even deliver on $1 billion. It doesn't deliver on $500 million. It delivers over the forward estimates only $5 million, Madam Deputy Speaker, i.e. Gonski has been scrapped. It will be another broken promise. It will be another case where you set up expectations to a government sector and to millions of parents, and it will not be delivered, Madam Deputy Speaker. If I can just conclude in my final few seconds again by saying this is a missed opportunity this is an irresponsible budget. It is based on increased taxes, spending which is out of control, and simply increasing the government debt which future generations will have to pay for.
Thank you. Members' time has expired.